Welcome back to the fifth and final section of the Mortal Kombat series, where we're exploring how to create this look using both Boris effects and other software. I'm going to walk you through how I used Boris Continuum Complete and Sapphire in After Effects to create the final composite. So let's get started. So here in the main composition, I've divided the animation up into a fire comp and an ice comp. And to the fire comp, I've applied Sapphire wipe clouds. This is a transition, and I've keyframed wipe %. So when we get to about 150 frames or just before, the transition commences and it wipes off the fire dragon and wipes on the ice dragon. That was a really useful transition for this because I've got these particle sort of smoky clouds in the background, and wipe clouds is the same kind of fractal look. And with a shift speed of 800 on the X, the wipe is going from left to right. So it really fits in nicely with this look and makes it pretty seamless. So what we'll do first is we'll just go into the fire composition and talk about that, and then we'll look at the ice composition. I just double click there and come right down to the background, and I'll open up this hot background composition. So this is the base for the background, and let's start from the bottom. At the bottom, I've got Sapphire gradient, S gradient, and I've got an inner color just with this sort of burnt orange. We're just going to solo that, and we get that look there. We'll turn that on and off again in a moment. Above that, we have some rising smoke, and this is BCC particle illusion. Let me just click to launch particle illusion. Now, this rising smoke is based on a preset, and particle illusion ships with thousands of presets, so they're always a good place to start. If I just click in search emitters and type in seed, this is based on the seed and clouds. I just need to, let's see, click on dust and fog, and there it is there. That's seed and clouds. So that's a preset that ships with particle illusion. I've just come in and turned off the seeds and just made a few adjustments to the clouds to make this rising smoke. And once you've modified a preset, it's really easy just to come up to the hamburger menu for the emitter and click, and you can choose to save to emitter library. That's always a good thing to do when you've made adjustments to an emitter. You can just grab it as a preset next time. I'm just going to cancel that. And above rising smoke is another duplicate of rising smoke, just with the add blend mode. And that just makes the smoke a little more obvious. If I turn off S gradient, you can see we don't get that nice bright orange sort of central area. And that's really important for the overall look. Above that, we have embers. And embers is also particle illusion. Just a few rising embers, and these are also based on a preset. In this case, it was the Snow Tornado preset. Just made a few adjustments to that. And you'll notice also that I've applied Ultra Glow. Let me just turn that on and turn Ultra Glow off. Just hide these ones for a moment. So there's my embers. They're fairly difficult to see. Now, BCC particle illusion does have its own built-in glow, and in many cases this is perfect just for giving a little bit of extra glow. If I turn that on, you can see these parameters become available. But if you have Boris Effects Suite, as I do, then you have access to Sapphire, and Sapphire Ultra Glow is really my go-to glow effect. So rather than using the built-in glow, I just applied Sapphire Ultra Glow, and this really helps these stand out. Get a lovely soft glow around them, and they're nice and bright. If I turn it on and off, see what a difference that makes. Get this nice hot core and this nice outer glow. So that's Sapphire Ultra Glow on particle illusion. And embers, rising smoke, and S gradient. Now, above that we have a camera. Particle illusion is a 3D particle system, and that means you can use the After Effects camera when you're working in After Effects. With Ember selected, you can see up here that Use Comp Camera is checked. And if we just come back to Cinema 4D, if you've watched the previous tutorial, you'll know that I added a few keyframes to the Z position of the camera. We just go up to our 4 views here. You can see how the camera is pulling back. And I want the particles in After Effects to respond to that camera. Now, to get the camera across to After Effects, I could have used Cineware, but I actually prefer the aescripts.com plugin, AEC4D Pro. For me, this is a more robust, feature-rich Cinema 4D plugin for After Effects, and I definitely get more predictable results. And I have a camera in this scene, obviously, so all I have to come down to is this button on the left, Export Layers, and click. It takes me across to After Effects, makes a new comp, and if I hit the U key, you can see there's all of my keyframes. That's exactly what I did. So let me just close that up. I'm going to come up here and just remove that. There's all my keyframes. And if we just do a quick preview, notice how we're up close to the particles in the clouds at the beginning, or the smoke, and then we pull back. So my 3D particle illusion particles are reacting to the After Effects camera. And that's important because you want your particles to feel integrated into your overall look. So that's the hot background. I'm going to hit the Tab key and just use my left arrow key to come back to MK Fire, hit the space bar to open that up. Okay, so I've got my hot background, and above that we have this MK2 Ice, and this is the Mortal Kombat dragon. And it's called to Ice because this is the one that animates to the ice look. Let me just double click that. And we're going to take a good look at this composition when we look at the ice treatment, because not much really happens to the dragon on the first half of the animation. It all happens from about frame 150, and that's when it starts to turn to ice. So we'll take a look at that in a moment. Shift Escape to come back to the previous comp. And we'll just come back to about 75. Okay, so I'm up to my Effect Controls panel. Let's take a look at some of the effects I've used in here. And these effects have been added to integrate this 3D layer more effectively into this background. I'm going to turn these off. So there's the rendered 3D object. To that I've applied BCC Fast Film Process. Let's turn that on. And I've actually used a preset here. If I click just here, you can see there's a lot of different presets. I ended up using this one, Color Push, and it crushed the luminance a fair bit, but it added this nice warm effect to it. And it was a little bit too much for me, so I just applied it, but then came through and just adjusted the contrast and the gamma compensation, and not much more than that. Maybe just a little bit of post-saturation, just decreasing that. I often will do that with these film effects for Continuum. Just apply a preset and just fine-tune that for my look. Now, after that, we have light wrap. I'm just going to zoom in. I always feel you need a little bit of light wrap to make these composites more convincing, and BCC light wrap is definitely the one I turn to. Let me just turn that on, and you can see the difference that makes. So that's wrapping some pixels from the background around this object. Let me just open that up, and you can see that for the wrap source, I've chosen the background layer. So that's the reason why I needed to pre-compose all of those layers that comprise the background into this hot background comp. Then I can choose that as the wrap source. You can see what a big difference that makes. Now, after that, we have Ultra Glow again. Ever since Ultra Glow was introduced into Sapphire, it's really something I turn to a lot. Let me just turn that on. They're giving me a nice warm glow. You can see for the primary color, I've chosen a light orange, and for the afterglow color, I've chosen quite a brilliant red. And notice how it's being picked up on the brightest areas of this dragon. If you've watched the lighting tutorial, you remember I added a light that added these highlights onto the ring. And I did that on purpose because I knew I was going to add ultra glow and it would pick those highlights up. You've got a little one here and this one here and this one here. We just close that up. So without the effects and with those effects. So it's starting to feel like it's more integrated into the background. And remember, I added that backlight and I keyframed it from orange to blue. And there was a reason to have that orange at the beginning because it was going to be on this, hot orange background. Okay, so above that we have another particle illusion embers layer with ultra glow. And that's always a good thing to do because it helps the foreground object feel more integrated. And if I turn that on, you can see that these are in front of this foreground logo. And that helps add a bit of depth to this. If you've got your 3D object always sitting over the background with nothing in the foreground, it can tend to end up looking a little flat. And notice we also have a duplicate of the camera in here so that these 3D particle illusion embers will also react to the same camera. Now above that, if I just solo this, we have this eye render. And if you've watched the previous tutorials, you remember that I rendered out an emissive pass from Redshift in Cinema 4D. And that was on purpose because I knew I was going to apply Sapphire Lens Flare Auto Track. And all I had to do was apply Lens Flare Auto Track and choose a preset. Just coming down the list and grabbing a preset. I think it was this one here, Eye of the Beholder. And just made some adjustments to that preset. And it automatically locked on to these bright pixels because they're the only bright pixels besides black in this render. We just turn that on. You see it just locks on like that. And I don't have to do anything. You can see, let me just turn that off again and zoom in. As the eye is revealed, as the logo rotates forward, as soon as we get some pixels there, the lens flare locks onto that and increases in brightness and scale based on the size of those, or based on the size of the pixels behind. It's so easy, I don't have to do anything. So lens flare auto track. It has all of the features of Sapphire lens flare, but just with these auto tracking features as well. Just turn those back on. And that sits really nicely over this, this bright emissive eye. I did notice this green here is the oxidation that I applied in Substance Painter. And it's really nice because that emissive texture isn't visible. It's hidden, but you can see there's a little fall off from that emissive texture and it's revealing that oxidation, which is a nice little touch. As it comes forward, you start to see that lens flare appear, which is really nice. Now above that, I've actually used some rampant 2K embers. I like rampant stock footage, and the reason I've used this is because these are real embers, and just solo them. I've put these in the foreground. You see I've made them 3D, so they're also reacting to the After Effects camera. But these just add some realistic bursts of embers in front, and I think these really help. Just preview that. Just like that. I've added a few different ones. I just went through and auditioned a few and then just dropped them in and just shifted them left and right. So I get a few different bursts of these embers. And they look great when they're sitting in front of the dragon. Like that. So it's a combination of particle illusion particles and also ember footage. Now, if you've watched any of my tutorials over the last 20 or so years, you'll know that I like to use adjustment layers to sort of finish the look. So at the top here, I've got an adjustment layer with Sapphire's film effect. Sapphire's film effect's one of those great effects that I can just drop on and choose one of the different film presets until I find one that matches what I'm looking for. Adjust a few of the settings slightly and just let that do its job. just turn that on. You can see that's making that a little warmer. And this is over everything, so it's warming up the background and it's warming up the foreground. So what we're doing here is helping things feel a little more integrated, as if they're part of the same world. And above that, I have heat haze, and this is doing kind of the same thing, integrating both the foreground and the background and making this look nice and hot. And this is based on a preset. This is one of the Sapphire effect presets that I actually created that ships with Sapphire. And if I click on Edit Effect, that'll launch the effect builder. And this preset's made up of a few different Sapphire effects. I've got the glow effect, and I've got Sapphire Distort, and I'm piping in the Sapphire Clouds effect into the lens for Distort, and that's what's giving that sort of ripply look, that hot rippled look, and also using a gradient mask piped into the matte for the Distort. So once again, Sapphire effect coming to the rescue by combining a range of different Sapphire effects to create a particular look. I'm going to cancel that, and let's turn that on. And there's the finished fire look. And as I mentioned, at about frame 150, I'm using S-Wipe Clouds to wipe from this hot version of the dragon into the icy version. So let's take a look at the icy version next. Now, when I initially decided to do this look, I was only going to do the icy look, but I thought it would be kind of a missed opportunity not to do a fiery look. And then it really made sense to have it transition from fire to ice. The icy look definitely took a lot more work than the fiery look, but I think the combination of the two is really quite effective. So let's break down this ice look. Inside MK Ice, we have a cold background comp. And these are the layers that make up the cold background. Not quite as many. Once again, S gradient at the bottom, but this time two versions of S gradient, one with a darker inner color blue and one with a slightly brighter. Give this sort of icy background look. And on top of that is snow. And snow, once again, is using particle illusion. And here I've used a combination of presets. For this, I've used both the Seeds and Clouds preset and also the Snow Tornado preset. Just made a few adjustments to those. And also in here, I've used a force, the force here. And with the force, just increase the direction variation. And that's making these arrows point in different directions. And I've got a strength of 100. So as the particles move through these different force boxes, they're pushed in different directions, which gives these particles just a little more random movement. Going to cancel that. So that's the cold background. Once again, just hit the Tab key, left arrow key, spacebar. Now above that we have MK to Ice. So obviously this is the dragon logo. And we've got the fast film process and the light wrap. Let's take a look at this one. This is where all the action happens. Now I'm going to start with this layer here, MK base, actually the one below it. So this is the base comp with the logo pre-composed. You can see I've just used time remap just to extend those frames a little bit more at the end, just 25 frames. Now, when this changes from hot to cold, I wanted the metal to turn blue. And rather than just animating the color, you can see here I've used S tritone and changed the color 1, which is the midtones, to blue. I've also added BCC grunge. Let's turn that on and that one off. You see at the end it's actually quite blue. If I just move the time indicator, it's actually wiping on using BCC grunge. Now if I press E twice, notice how BCC grunge has an expression. You come down and check out BCC grunge. Everything is turned off except for erosion. So I'm using the erosion features of BCC grunge and the amount, which is actually linked to keyframes in another comp. Now stay with me here. This will make sense in just a moment. So for the erosion layer, I'm using this S grunge map composition. So this is basically in After Effects if you've used a gradient wipe. It's kind of similar, except it has more features. So I'm using this S-grunge map to wipe this layer on as it's turning blue. So as it's getting colder and colder, the metal's turning blue. We'll come back here in a moment. Let's look at this S-grunge map 1. So this is our grunge map, and this is a combination of Adobe Stock and Sapphire grunge. So I'm using both BCC grunge and Sapphire grunge in the same project. They both have some similarities, but they're more different than they are similar. So for S-grunge, I've just used one of the presets. It's an icy preset, and you can see it's given me kind of this icy look with a little bit of light blue, a little bit of white. So that was a good base. But I wanted to add some photographs of ice as well to add a bit of variation to this. And for that, I turned to Adobe Stock. If we double click on this composition, you can see we get these nice little fingers of ice. And they definitely add a bit of variation to this. Notice how I've also sort of masked areas off and I've made them black and white. Didn't want them too blue. Just use the black and white effect. So I'm just building up a grunge map with various different areas of these Adobe Stock images. Come back to grunge map 1 and come back to MK to ice. So once again, I'm using that S grunge map as a base for BCC grunge erosion. If we just turn on the original without that effect, what we get is this kind of look. Here we go there. So rather than a uniform change from gold to blue, it's more effective having this BCC grunge wipe this blue on. Now, why is there an expression here? Well, that's because I've used BCC grunge with keyframes in another composition, and I'm linking back to this one. You can see here it says Comp Ice Main Layer BCC grunge Master. If we open up Ice Main, this is all the animated ice that sits on top of the dragon. And we'll look at that in a moment, but this is the first composition, or the composition I started with, and this is why this has the keyframes for BCC grunge. So rather than copy and paste BCC grunge 4 or 5 times with the same keyframes, I've just created an expression which links back to this one. So if I decided to make any changes to those original keyframes, all of the other ones that reference this would update automatically. So there's my BCC grunge master layer. Let me just solo that. So this is using S grunge map 1, and it's using this BCC grunge master solid as an alpha map. Turn that on. Now it looks a little strange. You can see it looks like rust here. What I'm actually using, I'm not actually using the BCC grunge texture. The texture here is colorful peeling rust. That's the one you can actually see. Rather than use that particular texture, because you can use built-in textures, I'm using an erosion layer. So I'm using S grunge map as my erosion layer. And I've keyframed the amount. So I'm using the S grunge map as the fill and also as the erosion layer. So that's wiping it on. We get this kind of build-up of the ice. Like that. And there is a softness option here as well. You can see I've got the softness fairly high. If I bring that down to 0, you can see it looks good in certain areas, but it makes it look a little chunky. I wanted this to be a little softer, like that. So let's just turn that off. So that's the base for the main ice that sits on top of everything. And that's also the master application of BCC grunge, which every other application of BCC grunge references via an expression. And on top of that, I've added some Adobe stock. Let's just turn that one off. I didn't think that with just this combination of my S-grunge map and BCC grunge that my ice looked realistic. So I decided to turn to some stock footage. And for that, I went to Adobe stock. Let me just solo this one. So I'm using my S-grunge map comp, but here I'm using map 2 for a little bit of variation. So it's very similar to the previous one, but I've moved the frost around a little bit and just made it look a little different from grunge map 1. But I'm using this Adobe stock layer as my matte. Just open that. So this is a bit of footage from Adobe stock, and you can see this is actual real ice. And if you're looking for realism, then you can't beat real. So I've used that as a matte. And you can see I've masked off certain areas. Let me just preview this a little bit here. So the real footage of ice on a window is revealing my customized grunge map. Well, in this case, it's not really a map, it's just a fill layer. But that real frosty or frosting movement looks very convincing. And the reason I've duplicated a few times and masked them is because I just wanted to position them around different areas of the logo. You can see each one of them has a mask. They're just masked off with a little feathered mask. A little bit of levels applied to increase the contrast. So I just art directed where the frost was, where it's revealed on the logo. Just moved it around the comp. So that's the main ice layer. And I wanted to jump into that one so I could show you the BCC grunge master layer. So we've got our original, and we've got our tritone version with BCC grunge, referencing BCC grunge inside ice main via an expression. Like that. And keep in mind, while it's expressed to the amount, it's not expressed to the softness. So I've increased the softness quite dramatically for this reveal. You can see around here, because if I made this softness lower, and we get that look, which is not what we want. Okay, so let's turn on MK Ice. And if you've watched the previous tutorials, you remember that I did render out a single frame of the ice version of the Mortal Kombat logo. This is the ice material that I created in Substance Painter. There's nothing going on in here, it's just a still frame. But take a look up here. Once again, there's BCC grunge, and once again, the erosion is expressed to the amount inside ice main. So if we drag the current time indicator, the dragon's starting to turn blue, but we're also revealing that icy version, that icy material. And on top of that is ice main. So this is going to add all of that detail. And I've sharpened that detail just by using Sapphire Sharpen. Notice I've actually keyframed the amplitude. So as the ice is revealed, it actually gets a little sharper towards the end of the comp. I just felt that made it feel a little more icy. Above that, we have ice shards. And if you've watched the previous tutorials, you remember that I did a pass where I used these MoGraph cones to create these kind of pointy icy shards. And once again, just rendered out a single frame of that. And take a look at this. Once again, using BCC grunge, using the same ice main version. And as that amount animates, it starts revealing these little icy shards in the areas where the ice is on the front of the dragon. But you wouldn't want the icy shards just growing all at the same rate all around the dragon. You really want them to only appear in the areas where the ice is first appearing. Like that. I really thought that was quite effective, having those little icy shards sticking out. Now, while we're talking about icy shards, before I went into Cinema 4D and created this, I initially used displacement mapping to create shards. So turn that off, come down to, let's see, this one here, MK Ice. Turn that on. See how this is giving us sort of icy shards as well? This is, let's turn that off and turn this off. This is the iced version, but once again using BCC Grunge. Once again with the same erosion, but also with displacement map turned on. So as the BCC Grunge is revealing this icy version, it's also displaced, which is giving us these little spikes. Let's turn these back on. Icy shards. And after adding the icy shards, I thought, well, do I really need the displacement? And I decided to keep it because it has quite a different look. It's adding some variation to this. The icy shards are obviously very pointy, but this is more like ice is building up, but not necessarily in spikes. And once again, because it's using the same BCC Grunge, it's being revealed only in those areas that were keyframed in the ice main composition. Have a look here. You can see how it's changing the color of the dragon. It's revealing the ice version. It's got this ice main version on top, adding the detail. It's also revealing the icy shards, and it's revealing the displaced version behind. So all of these together start to make this look quite convincing. Now, above that, I have this ambient occlusion layer, which was rendered out of Cinema 4D, and I use a single frame of that. Notice I've set the mode to multiply. Just come back to where we can see it. The thing about adding all of these icy layers on top, especially this one here, Ice Main, you start to lose a lot of the shading. So to combat that, I've used that ambient occlusion pass on top, set to multiply, and see how it adds in the shadows. That's with, that's without, and that's with. So it adds in the shadows, particularly on top of this Ice Main version. So it doesn't flatten it out, it still keeps its dimensionality. And finally, I added a few icicles. Let me just turn that on. Inside this is a whole bunch of icicles compositions, and I've just used After Effects shape layers. So let's just select one at random. So here I've just used the shape layer pen and just drawn out a triangle, and then just keyframe the path. So this just animates down like that. And I've also used wiggle paths. So once you create a shape layer, you can come up to the Add pop-up menu, and you can choose to add different operators. So I used wiggle paths. So without wiggle paths, we get a nice straight triangle, but with, we get more of an icy look. And notice I've turned wiggles per second to 0, otherwise it would be animated. Once I created one, I just duplicated it and just repositioned them to create a little group of animating icicles. I also offset them slightly. You can see they're slightly offset in time here, so that they don't all finish growing at the same time. Like that. Once I set up one, I just duplicated it. You can see here I've got 1, 2, 3 different versions. Didn't want them to all look too similar. And then I positioned them around the dragon, just in the areas that I thought they would look most convincing. Notice also I've used the bevel alpha effect just to give that more dimensionality. Let's just see that. Choose one that we can actually see. I'm going to right click and choose Select Icicles 03. That's this one here. Let's turn that on and off. So that's with and without. A little bit of bevel alpha can go a long way to give it sort of 3D look. And you can see I've just sort of positioned them in areas that I thought would be most convincing. Just turn them off and on again. And you can see they're growing fairly slowly. So as the dragon is really sort of, almost frozen, these are sort of the last things to sort of finish growing. Notice also, look at these little areas here, around here, around here. That's that Adobe stock footage towards the end, just continuing its animation. You see there. So it's nice. It's pretty much frozen all over, but then we're getting this sort of top layer of ice just continuing to freeze it even more, and adds a bit more realistic movement and makes it a little more convincing. So that's the main treatment for the ice. Just unsolo those. Come back to ice. And that's it on the background. Once again, using BCC fast film process and BCC light wrap. The difference light wrap makes. Remember, we also have the lens flare, and the lens flare turns from orange to blue as the dragon gets iced up. Just turn that on. Exactly the same procedure as the Fire version. We just use Sapphire Clouds Wipe to transition between the two, but notice it actually disappears, and it also flickers. What's that? It gives a little flicker. I thought it was more convincing for this just to add a few scale, width, and brightness keyframes, so that we just turn the dragon back on. As the eye is getting iced over, then it's losing its ability to emit light, which means we're going to lose the lens flare. But rather than just animating the brightness down, I thought it looked a little more convincing to have that just flicker off as the ice is growing across the eye. Let's preview that. So it kind of looks like the dragon is dying, or the life inside the dragon is dying. That's kind of the feel I was going for, like that. It's only a small thing, but I think it just looks a little more effective. You can see that ice all growing over the dragon. This area looks particularly good. Around here. Let's just turn these layers back on. Okay, so last few layers. One is some real dust. Just some stock footage, added for the same reason that I added the real embers in front of the Fire version. So just some foreground dust. Looks kind of like a blizzard. Helps integrate that into the background, makes it look a little more realistic, and adds these sort of blurred foreground elements, and also adds that realistic stock footage movement. And above that, an adjustment layer with Sapphire film effect, just for the overall grade, like that. Make that nice and blue. Just come back to the main composition. So that was the treatment for the dragon, for the icy look. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this tutorial, animating from the Fire version to the Ice version was just a case of applying the Sapphire Wipe Clouds effect. You can see how I can use a combination of Boris Continuum complete effects and also Sapphire effects to create the finished look. So thanks for watching, and be sure to visit boriseffects.com to take a free trial of Sapphire or Continuum, and to see more videos about all of the Boris Effects products.